Good day, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our podcast where we're going to be covering Cloud Endpoints. To kick things off, my name is Kurt Adams. I'm the practice lead for security compliance identity management here at KiZAN Technologies. I've been with the organization for over 17 years, and prior to that, I was a communications computer systems operator in the U.S. Air Force. With that, I'll hand over the intro to Marshall.
Yeah, thanks, Kurt. My name is Marshall Ross. I am a solution architect lead here at KiZAN. I've been with KiZAN for 12 years now, and I've been in consulting my entire career. So, Nate?
So I'm the principal consultant for our device management team, part of our security, compliance, identity, and management team. I've been working with endpoints for my entire adult career and even some of my high school career. So most Windows tools and upgrade processes I'm familiar with.
Cool. All right. So, as mentioned earlier, we're going to be talking about Cloud Endpoints today. And to get us started, one of the things that we were talking about prior to getting the recording going was what are Cloud Endpoints to us? So, actually, rather than continuing to lead things off, Marshall, Nate, either of you want to take first cut at this?
I'd love to hear Marshall's take first.
Yeah, I'll take because this non-device focused person can tell you what it cloud endpoint. So to me, a cloud endpoint is really any device that you're connecting to that's not local to you, right? So it could mean you've got a VM in the cloud. It could be a physical endpoint out in some data center somewhere that you're connected to. When I think about cloud endpoints, I'm not thinking necessarily about a Windows 365 or a VDI environment somewhere. That's my non-technical version of what a cloud endpoint is. But I guess, Nate, give me the real technical version of what an actual cloud endpoint is.
Yeah, so if we're talking from a Microsoft perspective, typically that would be Windows 365 or AVD workstation. I think Microsoft would prefer the end state be more Windows 365 focused. The term for those Windows 365 PCs is a cloud PC. You may see some conflation with these terms as well because cloud endpoint really starts to point and blend a little bit with cloud native as a discussion, and all of these things tend to be intertwined. But really, for my work day to day, if we're talking about cloud endpoint, it's almost always going to be referencing, um, typically a persistent VDI of some sort that we're accessing remotely, something that can aid somebody to be able to be productive from any workstation. So the idea being that I can sign in from a phone, from a tablet, from my home PC, my personal computer, or from another work computer, sign into a cloud PC, sign in, get a desktop experience, and get work done as if, you know, I were sitting directly in front of that machine.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because when you said cloud PC, it was kind of more of a light bulb, right? It's the cloud endpoint could be a API somewhere, right? So I think getting specific and saying, these are cloud PCs rather than a cloud endpoint. But yeah, I would agree, like the nomenclature constantly changes too, right? I guess even within the Microsoft ecosystem, things that were previously cloud endpoints are really now cloud PCs.
Yeah, and Microsoft uses that term cloud PC, I think, to help make that distinction, at least within the context of Windows 365. If we're talking about AVD, for those who may be less familiar, that's Azure Virtual Desktop. It's been around for some time now, whereas Windows 365 is a more modern iteration of that solution in some respects. AVD can point to even just remote app sharing or non-persistent VDI where you have some multiple people connecting to the same device, virtual device that is. And looking at Windows 365, that's always going to be one-to-one, and that PC is always going to be where you left it unless it reboots for an update. But the story that we're trying to say is it's a personal computer. It's a cloud personal computer. So what's on it is mine. I don't have to worry about my documents roaming and that sort of thing, or getting a new session, having to log in after it's been re-provisioned. It stays exactly the same. So, some of our customers, when they sign into these PCs, they stop work at the end of the day, come back in the next day, and Outlook's still open, browser's still open, it's as if you just walked away from your desktop. We just have an extra step to get there. And so that can have many implications. But the idea being that for most organizations, it's a PC that we don't have to worry about refreshing the hardware on. We don't have to worry about the compatibility for anything. We don't have to worry about shipping a device back and forth. We can just give you credentials and we have total control over that PC.
Yeah, and I think that's honestly one of the biggest things that comes to mind for me when I think about Cloud Endpoints is just that split between the physical hardware and then the actual OS instance that the customer user is interfacing with. And while it's a little bit disingenuous to say, well, the Cloud PC, you can connect from it anywhere with anything. There's going to be some limitations. You need a certain level of bandwidth. You need a certain level of reliability of connection and things like that. But it does definitely disengage that connection between the local hardware that's in use and all of that business data, the apps and everything else that's being accessed. And since security and compliance is part of what my team covers, by melding that with device management and making that extrapolation or that breakdown that much easier is impactful. I mean, it really is.
Yeah. So, like when we talk about, we've kind of defined what a cloud PC may look like, but when we look at how that differs from what people are doing today, right? I think a lot of people today are, avid Citrix users and those kind of things. So, how do you differentiate what a cloud PC is from something like that?
It's a good question.
I think I can help answer that, at least if we're talking specifically in the context of Windows 365. Distinction for the end user and the distinction for the organization can be a little bit different. So if we're looking at a cloud PC and talking about it in the context of Windows 365, is by most accounts the same backend technology as Azure Virtual Desktop. But what we're doing is distilling all of the configuration and the complications of that PC down into essentially assigning a license. So for HR and for other departments in the organization, if we need to provision a new PC, and yes, there are some policies that need to be set up on the back end, but the idea being that once those are set up, we can just assign a license to somebody. So if we can provision, say, oh, well, we have a new temporary contractor, maybe a consultant from KiZAN is going to come work for a couple months and they need a PC. HR can provision them account, give them a license for Windows 365 PC, and it's going to automatically start building itself. And then once it's done, I can log into windows365.microsoft.com or use the RDP app and sign right in. And again, this isn't a device that's got the absolute minimum hardware. It's not being shared with anyone else. It is dedicated to me. So my experience is going to be a little bit better. You can have your network connected to the Microsoft backbone. So you've got really good bandwidth once you're in. So we just need enough connectivity to get into that cloud PC. And then it's using, Microsoft's network connectivity, which is inarguably better than anything any of us have, even in a business scenario. And then when we're done, we can just take that license and pull it back after a period of time. The cloud PC is deprovisioned, and then that license can be handed off to somebody else. So it's very flexible. The cost is very predictable. And for me, on the end user experience, I've used many different VDI solutions to access customer environments as a consultant over the years. It really is just simple. It's very straightforward to sign in. There's no confusion. The experience is really good. And I think in a lot of ways, the answer is simplicity, where it varies from some of these other solutions. It would say that, for most people, they are going to be able to be productive just the way that they would with any other computer that's directly in front of them. If you attach a keyboard and a mouse to a tablet, it's got whatever horsepower is on that cloud PC. And again, that's kind of where I see the main difference is just overall simplicity, both for the IT department and for that end user. We also have the benefit of protecting this with conditional access and limiting what activity can happen. So we can kind of use this as a gateway for the organization. So you may not be able to access email unless you go through that cloud PC. So it gives us again, the idea is we can get this set up and secure quickly, and we can get people to work quickly. And that's, you've got savings and less friction.
Yeah.
So
Go ahead, Marshall.
so to kind of wrap it up, on that, Nate, like the idea is that you've got a functional PC for the end user. It's back-ended by, I guess, AVD, a known technology, but you're not left with all the other management setup configuration of
Yeah,
that.
there's no concerns about pooling or scaling or making sure that resources are allocated appropriately. You don't have to mess with FS logics for profiles. We don't have to, you know,
Yeah, I think that,
we're setting up some guardrails for this PC, but the license contains how many cores we use, how much RAM we have, how much hard drive space we have. And once that gets assigned, that PC just gets built. There's no shouldn't be much management beyond that unless there's a problem that the user's having. And if the user determines that they need extra hardware, we can just upgrade their license to something that has more SKU and it'll go ahead and convert that cloud PC up. So it's a very
that's yeah, I
painless
think that's
procedure.
that's the coolest thing. Like just kind of doing a little bit of looking around, preparing for this. In the way that Windows 365 kind of lays out their tiered pricing, right? Is you can move that even if let's say like 1 month I need a really powerful PC, I'm going to be doing some kind of architectural drafting thing or something. I need this huge PC to be able to do that, but next month I'm traveling or we're doing something that's going to be a lot lower power, right? I can drop that license down to a lower SKU. I still maintain all of my profile, my configuration, all that stuff stays the same. I'm just in a lower tier of performance.
Yeah. Um, and I don't know if either of you know this, but once upon a time, I was actually Citrix certified for both Zen Desktop and Zen App. Uh,
Was not
Granted,
aware of this.
it was a few moons ago, but I would just echo what you guys have been hitting on, the simplicity of being able to make modifications, have those modifications kind of replicate out or flow out through the infrastructure. Cost control, that ease of understanding what you're getting into and what your potential options are for getting out or making modifications is huge from an administrative perspective. And then, like you were saying, Nate, on the end user side of things, if it's functionally behind a pane of glass as far as they're concerned, that's the best of both worlds, really.
Yeah, and something else to note, because I recently experienced this with several organizations logging into their VDI solutions. And to be fair, their VDI solutions work just fine, but signing in is a painful experience. They've got it integrated with Microsoft, but it's essentially through ADFS, and something's not quite right there. We see that regularly. I
Yeah.
see Marshall kind of
No ADFS going on
making
there.
some it's just not a good experience, and sometimes it doesn't work right, or the connectivity is a little bit funny, and some places are even just authenticating with on-premises credentials, and maybe you go to another portal to get to that to sign in. Whereas these cloud PCs can really operate from a purely cloud-based portal. There's no on-prem infrastructure that has to be tied in. I'm signing directly into the PC, and it's authenticating against Entra, and it's quick. We can also configure SSO, so we're saving an extra step there. So once you're signed into the portal to get to that cloud PC, you can just click on it to connect and don't have to sign in another time. And minimizing those types of little nags really makes things just,
So
where
yeah,
it adds up over time is what it is. It may on its own say, oh, well, it takes an extra 15 seconds to log in. So what? Well, if you've got new users or they're not sure what's going on or the first login fails or something's not clear, it just adds additional friction. But if you've got everything integrated, if you're already working towards a cloud first situation and you can authenticate with your same credentials that you sign into your email with or with any other tool, or you sign into your what you use to enroll your device in Intune, it's consistent. There's no surprises. And again, you can look at difference in costs and things like that for the back end for spinning these things up. But you're saving so much time from IT folks, from HR, from anyone who's going to be provisioning and deprovisioning these devices. And I'm always excited when I get to work with a customer who's already using these solutions. And to be clear, AVD can function very similar to Windows 365, how you connect to it. But uh, when I get those instructions and I'm like, I already know what to do, and I already know the experience is going to be painless. I don't have to connect to a VPN ahead of time. We've all as consultants been there, and I think a lot of IT people are familiar with that as well. But everyone has a completely different setup. This takes away all that friction.
Yeah. So I want to hit on one thing real quick before we maybe switch gears. Connectivity to the cloud PC, right? We've kind of glossed over some of that, but Kurt, I know, what, like these, how do I connect to my cloud PC?
Yeah, so again, one of the nice things with Windows 365 and similar cloud endpoint solutions is that you generally have a wealth of options. So in the case of Cloud PC, you've got the browser-based experience. You've got I believe it's been rebranded as the Microsoft app now, or the Windows app to connect. And you can do that through mobile. You can do that through a traditional other Windows device. And the connection is, like most other VDI type solutions, is going to be contextually aware of the amount of bandwidth that you have available, and it's going to tune your experience based off that bandwidth availability. But it really is designed to be as simple and as straightforward as it can be.
Yeah. I think the multi-modals of connectivity is pretty crazy. Like connecting to it from your phone and, grabbing a document or looking at something from your cloud PC from your phone is neat. I'll say that. I mean, it's a different way of working for sure, right? But
Yeah.
yeah, it's pretty cool. So I've given it a go a couple of times, and kind of impressed with actually how well it does work. Not thinking that it'd be able to render things properly or it would just be too slow to use.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing that we haven't really touched on, but as long as the end user, as long as we have whatever our preferred connectivity solution is set up appropriately, if, like Nate mentioned earlier, we're consultants, we work in a lot of different environments, you can have all those sessions basically lined up and be able to go from one session to another as you need to in a more corporate appropriate experience. It might be that IT has a jump box for when they're doing high-level administrative activities, and then they've got their daily driver, and then maybe they've got a dev box when they need to do some packaging or testing. So not that that's, again, particularly unique to the cloud endpoint experience per se, but just the ability to have all of those instances hosted and have them connected to via a standardized methodology is very efficient.
So if I'm a user and I've got Windows 365 I use as my, I get into it every day. Is it just a single PC that I can have, or can I actually have multiple PCs that I can connect to?
You could have multiple that you can connect to as a single user. The distinction that I'll go ahead and make there is that converse is not true. So you can't really, if you're using a cloud PC in the Windows 365 context, it's specific to you. So, and there are ways that admins can sign in and work with it, but because the license is assigned to the user and that device is provisioned based on that user, it's really intended to be one to one for that person. But if you needed one that had like additional GPU power and things like that, and we needed another one that, say, was maybe on a different network and segmented for some, I don't know. We've got some folks that work in the pharmaceutical industry and they need to have computers that are on isolated networks with heavier restrictions. We could certainly have multiples. And actually, if you go to the web portal and sign into the windows365.microsoft.com, it will show you anything that's available to you to connect. So the other case would be too, if you had an AVD instance and you wanted to connect to that, or there was a remote app that was published to you, you could access it there. And you can also then have your Windows 365 Cloud PC.
Yeah. Well, anything else we can think of that we want to touch on with just endpoints at a high level before we dive into security and compliance implications here?
Yeah, I just wanted to say briefly that I think that these are an important tool for organizations as we try to move faster. You start hearing the terms like modern management and modern desktop experience, and this really kind of plugs into that. Just because we have less variables to worry about, we don't have to worry about hardware refresh. Is it going to be compatible with Windows 11, Windows 12, whatever comes next? We don't have to worry about that. You can have the oldest, crustiest hardware at home and still connect to your cloud PC and have a good experience. You can use your iPad, which is about as far as you can get from a Windows PC, and still sign in and get a good experience. And having this helps organizations be a little more consistent with their workstation load. So if we're talking about migrating devices and moving them or hybrid versus cloud only, etc., making sure those devices stay patched, get the right applications, and provide a good user experience for people is still a huge challenge. We're taking a lot of those variables out of the way, reducing the amount of time that IT has to spend dealing with workstation lifecycle management. It frees up time for us to do other things because I think most of us are pretty busy during the day.
Assuming everything is set up correctly, right, on the back end, and I think that's what.
Yes, yes, and this is just taking some of those variables away. There's less to
Yeah.
be set up. So, it's definitely more of a packaged experience, and again, it's good for the admin and the end user.
Definitely. Well, all right. So let's talk security and compliance a little bit to, I guess, maybe put a framework around that or add some context. What would be some of the key benefits or areas where having a cloud endpoint simplifies things that come to mind for you guys when we talk about security or compliance considerations?
In terms of I just talked about simplifying things, and one of the things a cloud PC can do is, again, we're talking, COVID changed a lot of things for us, and it still kind of seems like yesterday for me and probably for a lot of other people, but that's been, 5 years ago that took place. And it very quickly changed the landscape for most organizations. I know some places are trying to go back to work and some folks are kind of operating in a hybrid sense, right? But the vast majority of companies have adopted at least, you know, a quarter of their user base is now remote. And if you have high turnover, even if you don't, you still have to send a device out to this user, make sure it's provisioned historically beforehand, although autopilot can do provisioning at the user's desk side, but we still have to be responsible for that device, make sure that it gets to the user, it has everything on it, and it's functioning correctly. If something happens to that device or it doesn't work correctly or it has a problem with hardware, then we're looking at, sending it back and forth, or hardware refresh time comes. Does the user send their laptop off? Do they get another one in the mail? And it's just a lot of back and forth and complication. With the cloud PC, it's always going to be hosted on a network that we have full control of. There's no physical hardware that has to go out for it. We don't have to reclaim that device. It can't, in the traditional sense, be stolen because it's not a piece of physical hardware.
Yeah, I think
And if it's blocked, if it's protected by conditional access or those typical cloud protections, then we have that additional layer on top of it. So you know you're just removing all of these variables. You're removing steps that can be executed incorrectly, and you're removing just opportunities for malicious activity.
Yeah, it really feels to me like when you go to work directly in the cloud, you go to office.com, sign in, you've got access to your email, you've got access to your files, but it gives it to you in a much more familiar way. People are used to sitting down, they're used to opening Outlook, they're used to opening Teams, right? So to be able to provide them that end user experience and still have it kind of behind that pane of glass is probably where we see the most improvement from a security posture perspective, right?
Right. You can prevent them from copy and pasting out of the area. You really are just kind of operating through a window
Yeah. And
in many senses. And that for me, as someone who's long worked through challenges of managing endpoints and things like that, I have thought at times that I should be asking KiZAN if I can have a cloud PC because it would make things easier for me. It wouldn't matter, as much if my device is compliant. An example of that is I work from a traditional desktop, but occasionally I have to travel still, even though we're mostly remote. And if my laptop's been off for a while, maybe it's not compliant and Intune needs a little bit. So now I have to wait until I can access resources on my PC. I have to make sure that it's up to the company's standards before I can get work done. And I don't have to worry about any of that. And not too long ago, my laptop just decided to die. The drive died in it, and I had to go get a new one, get it set up, and get things configured. And I got back to work pretty quick because most of our stuff's cloud based, but there's still that delay. Whereas if I had a cloud PC, I could have get on from anywhere and it wouldn't matter. All I'd have to do is just have access to a browser essentially. Again, just reduces that friction, reduces concern for what the security posture of the device I'm connecting from is because I'm still coming in from a limited browser and we're still authenticating and verifying that access as I sign in.
So things like conditional access, SSO, um, Intune, controlling the device, the policies on the device gives you guys a nice, even, consistent experience from an end user perspective, right? They know when they can and can't get in. Uh, we're allowed to control that PC even more so than maybe a user with a laptop or a desktop at home. We have more control over that PC in order to fully secure it.
Yes, and
Uh,
it's always connected,
yeah,
right? So my laptop may be off for an extended period of time in my bag, or if I'm working in, depending on some organizations, may have to VPN in to get group policy updates or get updates from Config Manager. And when we talk about cloud or modern endpoints, obviously some of us are kind of thinking, well, hopefully you're not relying on GPO and a VPN that's, triggered by a user sign in. But there's a lot of organizations that are doing this. And with Intune as a whole, and this is again not cloud PC specific, but with Intune, if it's connected to the internet, then we're getting policy and it's being enforced. And I don't have to worry about whether or not that device is getting my latest updated policy to make that device secure or worry about whether or not it's getting patched. We configure those cloud PCs inside of Intune. So they get provisioned out of there and we can build all of our policies. And if you're familiar with autopilot, this is not an autopilot experience, but it is very similar in the way that it's approached. So for a lot of organizations at this point, it's familiar.
yeah. And you talk about kind of building that cloud PC, right? That's using from what I understand, and this is my limited knowledge, is like a pre-canned image that you can get from Microsoft.
Yeah, they call them gallery images, and there's a couple different options. You can do Windows 10 or Windows 11 with different feature update levels. And some of them even have Office pre-installed. So if you are going to be using that productivity suite, I would encourage using those gallery images with Office pre-installed. They have some optimizations built into the OS and to the M365 apps to make them run a little bit better through that cloud PC. So just that experience is a little bit better. And again, it's all sort of curated by Microsoft to make sure that we're having the best experience possible. You can use custom images if you need to. And there are organizations, especially you'd mentioned, like if you were doing development, things like that, we may not want to install AutoCAD from Intune. That's just not going to be a good experience for the admin or for the end user. So there are times where we can use those custom images out there. But yes, they're pre-patched, pre-configured from Microsoft to be safe and fast.
Yeah, and on the security and compliance front, so a lot of times when I'm speaking with customers, or especially directors, C-suite, etc., one of the scenarios that I always like to use is grandma's PC. So I'm home on vacation or the holidays, and I'm an IT guy, something happens, I need to get back into the environment, troubleshoot something, figure out what's going on, whatever the case may be. And I didn't bring my work-provided device. In days gone by, the option usually would have been to either connect to webmail or whatever other options and get, a very limited amount of data. Or if I'm savvy or weird and carrying around a USB drive with my VPN installer, maybe pop the corporate VPN on grandma's PC, connect in, and fix the thing, because that's generally the pressure, is to be responsive, be there, and be available. But in those types of scenarios, again, in days gone by, there were a lot of concerns around, of course, just the underlying PC. But what type of data is transiting to and from that device? What's being stored? Did I forget that I downloaded a sensitive file and then I left it there? And even if the device isn't compromised today, what if it gets compromised next week or next year? Again, having that extrapolation and having that operating system and everything else that I'm doing remote from the device that I'm actually physically on, simplifies and extrapolates a lot of that potential for compromise. Again, not a 100% fix. Grandma's PC can still get you, but yeah.
I can imagine the scenario where you do that and then you leave, and then grandma exfiltrates all the company information accidentally because you left your VPN client connected.
Well, it's the 57 toolbars that are installed, and some of those are from the nice, kind scammer that asked to install TeamViewer and,
Are you still running Netscape Navigator on that? And in what version are you running?
Right. And then that hard drive cleaner kicks off and it finds all these new apps and files that it needs to go through and have fun times with. And yeah.
And actually, I ran into this not too long ago. My grandma had passed away several years ago, but my aunt had her old computer, and it's just basically this fossil. And she was still using it with Internet Explorer, and there's a big bar that says that this is outdated. And there were some toolbars that are probably deserve to be in a museum on that PC. I would not do anything on that computer with my credentials. However, they do exist, and there are times where we need to get to work, and that really, like, goes just back to you can work from anywhere on these things, and it's a secured window, and some of them are more secure than others depending on organizational requirements, but having conditional access in front of this, so maybe that computer's already running a VPN and we don't know about it. Conditional access may just outright block it because it's being channeled through Russia or somewhere. So
It's interesting. So, like, what happens then from a security compliance perspective, right? We want to be able to enable people to work and do what they need to do wherever. But let's say I sit down at a public computer somewhere at a library. I don't know if people still do that nowadays. But anyway, like you sit down, log in, go here, and conditional access says, nah, you're blocked, right? Are there avenues that we can use other than our phones and things like that, but to connect to those PCs from a more compliant perspective?
we could ironically require a compliant device, so would be Intune enrolled and protected for you to be able to access this cloud PC. And I do have some organizations that operate in that functionality. So they are providing a actual workstation with the expectation that it is more or less a jump box to one or more resources. And they are still protecting that resource. And still there's advantages there because those machines don't have to be as powerful, right? They can use recycled hardware. We don't have to have a big hard drive. We don't have to have the most RAM. It just has to load up the browser or that Windows client to authenticate to that VM. And, that gives us some flexibility, but really, these should be secure enough with the appropriate conditional access controls that a user can authenticate to them from just about any endpoint, right? And still have some expectation of security. Now, there is some configuration, like I said, things like the ability to translate, like a Teams call. So these cloud PCs you can do Teams calls over them, which is a pretty cool feature to be able to do that remotely into a cloud PC, or use the clipboard or copy files in and out, and we can control how much of that we allow. So you can really ratchet down what people are allowed to bring in and out of that environment. And
Yeah.
if you don't know, Kurt used the grandma's PC option, but I have customers who have offshore workers and they don't provide them a machine. They provide them a cloud PC and they're on the other side of the world. We have no idea what their computer looks like, what is installed on it. They may be working for other customers as well. And you just have zero idea and you have to assume the worst. And so we tend to lock those sessions down so they really are just kind of, pointing through the glass essentially, but they're still able to be productive.
Yeah. And I think that's when we're talking about cloud endpoints, one of the things that I do run into from time to times are folks who look at it as a all or nothing proposition. And that's definitely not the use case, at least not in the modern iteration. But where it is a great fit would be for things like contingent workforces, contractors, auditors, remote workers, maybe IT folks who have to be highly mobile or readily or able to access sensitive data sets and so forth. But it doesn't have to be something that applies to everybody, but it absolutely can address a lot of what normally would be considerations or scenarios that security administrators and compliance administrators are staying up late at night trying to wrangle with how to best manage and maintain control of those security or compliance controls. And we haven't really talked to it too much, but other than, I think, Nate, you've kind of alluded to it a couple of times here, the direct and native integration between W365 and Entra and Intune and the Defender Suite and everything else that goes into a lot of the Microsoft security and compliance ecosystem is extremely powerful and can greatly enhance what type of services we're providing to the end users, but also the security and compliance around those resources.
Yeah, so conditional access, not autopilot, but Intune, Purview, right? These solutions that probably most people are already using to some degree in the environment just fit naturally with this, right? And it's fully integrated. So yeah, it's interesting though from that perspective. So like all the cloud resources we consider to be safe, right? They're behind some level of control that we can get behind. So what happens when I'm a user and I need to get to like an on-prem file share or something, right? Because that's usually, at least in my experience, when we talk to customers, it's kind of like a crux, right? They're using on-prem Active Directory, on-prem file shares, those kind of things as kind of this, I can't go to the cloud, I can't be cloud first, I can't do this because I have all these things. So, how do we help them kind of navigate that water?
Absolutely. Once we start getting into some of the strategic decisions that organizations need to make and how to best handle like the exact scenario you're just talking through, having a cloud endpoint gives you that, if not middle ground, then at least a staging solution. Again, it doesn't have to be a permanent, this is what we're going to for everybody going forward type situation, but over the course of a hardware refresh, over the course of a domain consolidation or migration, merger, acquisition, divestiture, whatever the case might be, having the option to rapidly provision, deprovision, and make sure that the resources are accessible to the users that need access is, again, extremely powerful from a business perspective.
Yeah, M&A is a huge one, right? We do a lot of M&A activities here, and being able to basically provision those users a net new PC in the destination environment is really powerful, right? They can continue to keep their existing laptops, desktops that are connected to the old or the source environment, and then just remote into this new PC and get to work immediately. So I think it's a like you said, Kurt, it's a stopgap, right? It may not be the end solution, but it's a day one solution for organizations where they can just say, we have all these cloud PCs. All you have to do is go to this link, enter in your destination credentials, and you have access to our ERP, you have access to our CRM environments, the whole host of all their applications that they use on that destination.
Absolutely. And also from a use cases or scenarios perspective, I can think of two examples. One was a retail customer and the other one was a manufacturing firm. The retail customer, of course, they had holiday surges and things like that where they needed to staff up, staff down, and that sort of thing. And in years gone by, they had to provide a mix of physical devices in their physical locations and then provision some form of connectivity for those. I think they had a portion of their staff that grew and shrunk around the holidays related to customer support. So it wasn't, out in a storefront per se, but rather somebody on the phone or somebody in chat who can support the customer base. And having that ability, again, to handle that workforce as it builds up and then as it spins back down without the need to worry about hardware acquisition and shipping and tracking and making sure that everything gets returned, devices don't grow legs, all that good stuff. Cloud Endpoint came in clutch, really, to help address that. And then on the manufacturing front, it was actually more around a idea was identified and a design needed to be generated. Basically, a product needed to be generated. And so they outsourced some of the design work. And it was the same thing. They wanted to keep all of the data in-house. They wanted to make sure that nothing went outside their boundaries. But they needed to make sure that these external developers that needed to use CAD programs and other, fairly heavy-hitting applications had all the necessary resources, and Cloud Endpoint fit the bill.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've worked with several organizations where they were in the middle of a merger and migrating between, doing a domain migration, as most of us are familiar with, was just not really on the table at the time. There's a lot of complexities involved in that. And as they were starting to transition, they really needed access to both environments. Now, for a lot of their users, they used AVD rather than Windows 365, but again, that experience is very similar. And they were able to rapidly produce additional machines. Originally, they were going to send out laptops. So you have two companies that are converging, and now they have the expense of two physical machines, and you have to maintain life cycle for that in two separate environments and keep track of that, make sure that that laptop gets returned, make sure that, when they're done with the old PC that it gets reclaimed. And now you're just really looking at a huge mess. And in some cases, I've also seen people have two machines and one of them they're remoting into. So tell me why we can't have a cloud PC in that situation and just reduce that complexity. It really just makes things a lot easier. And here often people will bring up the cost, and it can be cheaper to run an AVD machine over a Windows 365 Cloud PC, and you may be able to crunch some of these other VDI solutions down to make them a little bit cheaper. But you have to remember, how many IT people are you paying? How many hours are they spending working on this solution and maintaining it or building it, expanding it, all of those things. And those hardware costs, it's not just the hardware, it's not just the cost of the laptop, it's the warranty for the laptop, it is the recycling for the laptop. It is shipping it out and shipping it back. And sometimes you may be doing that several times, right? You may be, sending it off, having somebody, their laptop has a problem, they need a new one. And then you also have your IT department who, depending on how you provision devices today, may be having to put hands on that keyboard, pull it out of the box, provision it or reprovision it, box it back up, send it to the user, call them on the phone, help them get set up, taking away all of that.
Yeah. So from a overall like security compliance model, this generally fits in for most organizations. It certainly fits into things like zero trust, right? And being able to effectively decouple that piece of the model out, right? Now it's behind. It's in your network all the time. You can fully manage it. And then with the technology around the Defender suite being on there, the cost savings there alone, right? Because you're not having to manage another EDR solution. You're not having to manage the hardware, to your point, Nate. And then even the soft costs around IT labor are just generally not incurred here. And I think it's
Yeah.
funny because like M&A in general has always been kind of a business as usual. Every company has their framework of how they do M&A, and when you said we ship out new laptops, that is 100% true. Probably 90% of the customers we work with on these M&A ventures just say, okay, we just acquired a 3,000 user organization. We can't start M&A activities for the next 4 months because we're ordering laptops, we're getting them shipped in, we're rolling our gold image onto them, and then now we've got to ship them back out to the end users. And in some cases, it's a streamlined process, but for that aspect and just being able to say, okay, well, we created them identity. Now we just check the box that says, here's your Windows 365 PC, and you're good to go.
Yeah, you just send them a Word document that tells them in one or two pages how to access, and they should be good to go. And again, to stress anytime you have multiple steps involved for a process, you are just adding opportunity unless there's automation. And if we're talking about a physical device, there's just no way to automate certain parts of that, right? The less that we have to do, the less that we have to rely on multiple departments in the organization, the better off we are. We forgot to install security software on that machine, or it doesn't have the TPM turned on because someone forgot to, or whatever the case. Or, maybe it got shipped to somebody's house and we didn't have a signature requirement for that package and it got stolen off of somebody's, porch. There are
Or we
just,
just didn't deliver it because the person wasn't there to be shipped to, and
yeah.
that's happened to me like 7 times. But I'm just saying.
Yeah, there's just a lot of variables where both cost and risk ratchet up. And again, anytime you've got a remote machine, assuming you're not already completely cloud first and integrated there, you're incurring some risk. And with these cloud PCs, we can prevent any access to the organization's resources. So, I can say you're not allowed to access Outlook, you can't access Teams, OneDrive, you can't access any cloud applications unless you're coming in through that Cloud PC. You can do it from the Cloud PC or from an internal trusted device, but we can basically have that as the choke point so that, we are going to verify who you are positively. And then once you're in that session from that Cloud PC, you can access sensitive things so that you can't take it out. You can't accidentally save it to grandma's PC. You can't, you know, leave the organization exposed. And I think that that's just, again, the more that you get in the weeds, you just start taking away opportunities for misconfiguration, for accidents. And a lot of times that's key to security as well. We want multiple layers for security. We can have that on the device itself because it's a Cloud PC that we manage. We put policy on. We can have our Intune security baselines and our Intune configuration profiles and all of those things. We can have Defender for Endpoint on there connected, but we're taking away layers of complexity by just being able to, like I said, once we've got everything set up, assign a license. Assign a license, wait a couple hours. Here's your PC. Get to work. I know as an IT administrator, it's patched and it's up to date. I know that it has all of our security policies applied to it. And I know that you have to use MFA or secure credentials to authenticate to it before you get to it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think to kind of bring the whole conversation around that workflow of making some assumptions as far as what systems are integrated and so forth, but new users hired by the organization and their data is input into the HR system, which then flows into the identity access management solution or IDP solution. From there, it flows into group memberships and so forth. Device provisioning takes place, and from a logical and a flow perspective, within a couple of hours of a user getting input into the HR system, they can be fully up and running. Device is provisioned, they've been sent their welcome email, they've got instructions on how to connect. Once they're connected, it's got all their apps, it's ready to go. And like Nate, you were just saying, it's fully provisioned, it's fully in line with corporate standards, and they can just start. Whereas there have definitely been times, further back you go, the more egregious, but where you start with an organization or a user gets hired on and it's, they hire on Monday. Well, it's Wednesday and they finally get hands on keyboard because that's when they finally get to a point where device is provisioned and they can get running. So it just has the chance to greatly consolidate and optimize that process.
So from a real high level, like as a executive at an organization looking at these, I think we've kind of gone over a lot of stuff in the weeds, but I guess what I heard and kind of the takeaway that I would have is Cloud PCs, cost effective, increasing productivity, and reducing risk.
I think that's a great synopsis, yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, appreciate the conversation today. I think we hit on a lot of interesting stuff. Sounds like we've all had unique and interesting experiences when it comes to connectivity and getting devices and getting access to things, but very interested to hear what our community has to say, any experiences other folks have had or questions or ideas that you have. So appreciate your time today. Marshall, Nate, as always, a pleasure.
Absolutely.
And I think with that, we'll wrap this thing up.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you.